Meet Punpun. He's an average kid in an average town. He wants to win a Nobel Prize and save the world. He wants to go far away with his true love. He wants to find some porn. But Punpun's life is about to unravel. This is Punpun Onodera, and as the blurb just mentioned, he's an average kid, and he is the most well-realised character I have ever read in a manga. This story is very bleak. There's no other way to describe it. A coming-of-age story that drags the reader through tribulation after tribulation, similar in vein to No Longer Human, with Punpun for the best moments and more importantly the worst. But to properly understand this story is to understand its background. Inio Asano is a well-renowned mangaka with works such as Solanin already under his belt prior to his writing of Punpun. To fully understand this story, I believe it's important to first understand the author's intentions and thought process behind a lot of the decisions, particularly as Asano wrote the series in this way despite the dwindling Japanese support due to the darker tone it took on. On this, Asano says, "What I had planned at the time I'd finished the first chapter was that it'd tell the story of this boy named Punpun as he grew up, spanning roughly 10 years. The heroine was Aiko, and if you were to label it by genre, it'd be a love manga, a romance. The turning point of the story was to be some sort of incident that happens partway through, after which Punpun and Aiko go on the run, and the second half of the story was supposed to be like a road movie. Around the start of Volume 3, where Punpun started junior high school, I decided the incident would be a 20-year-old Punpun killing someone, after which Punpun and Aiko would run away together. It was also around Volume 3 that I decided that Harumin, the old friend from elementary school, would appear in the final chapter too. What I was scared of before I did that scene was that people would start calling Punpun a depressing manga, or utsu manga. It's a pretty new term people use now, and I felt like it was pretty dangerous to have people labeling it that. I really hated to be lumped together in that category, but even as Punpun's reputation as depressing spreads, people just read it and enjoy it as such. The whole depressing manga thing is coming around to be accepted as just another form of entertainment. I guess now the shock of the protagonist committing murder might pack less of a punch though. So, as is now made very clear through those comments by Asano, the story of Punpun follows him from grade school all the way until his 20s. I'm going to do a volume by volume recap, just covering the key plot points and adding any thoughts I may have had when reading. So let's hop into this part of the video. Volume 1 starts with Aiko Tanaka transferring into Punpun elementary school class, and they come to like each other. At home, Punpun walks into what looks like the aftermath of his father abusing his mother. While she stays in the hospital and his father separately, her brother Yuichi Onodera comes to live with Punpun. Punpun also learns that Aiko's mother sells miracle water, and he makes a promise with Aiko to take her away to her uncle in Kagoshima. Punpun and his friends watch a porn cassette and stumble upon a taped-over confession of a man who has murdered his family, requesting that they locate the bodies and an award. Punpun and his friends, along with Aiko, visit the abandoned miso factory mentioned in the video. At the factory, they meet a girl, but don't find anything. However, on the roof of the last building they see the silhouette of a man. Most of the group flees except Aiko, who gets knocked out, and Punpun, who stays with her. At the time, a cigarette that Seki had smoked causes a fire. The man approaches them, Punpun's life flashes before his eyes and he faints, with the fire having been put out by rain. As the semester ends, Punpun dreads having to face Aiko after not being able to grant her wish. On the last day, she asks him to meet her later. However, Punpun finds out that his mother had jumped off her hospital balcony and instead visits her. Punpun spends the rest of the summer depressed and secluded, and when school starts again, Aiko ignores him. Punpun's parents get divorced and he vows to become an adult. 2 years later in middle school, Aiko is dating Yaguchi, the badminton club captain, and Punpun still has feelings for her. Volume 2 starts off with Seki, one of Punpun's friends, becoming close to Shimizu after saving him from some bullies. One day when Punpun skips badminton practice, Yaguchi befriends him. In badminton, Punpun's friend Komatsu starts to dominate Yaguchi, who is also suffering from an Achilles tendon, when Punpun confides his feelings for Aiko to Yaguchi, who is torn between his sports career and her. Yaguchi wagers his relationship with Aiko over the result of the upcoming tournament. Yuichi meets Midori, a worker at a coffee shop, who asks him out. Although they get along, Yuichi holds guilt from a past relationship and tries to drive Midori away, but she demands to learn about his past. Yuichi recounts how 5 years ago he was teaching at a pottery workshop and went on a date with the high school-aged daughter of one of his students. She revealed to Yuichi that after having had an abortion, she was being kept under house arrest by her mother and requested Yuichi's help. Yuichi took the girl to his apartment and they almost had sex, but Yuichi resisted because he knew he couldn't help the girl. When Yuichi returned to work after 2 weeks, his co-worker Washio attacked the girl's mother with a hammer. As Yuichi ran outside to find a policeman, he met the girl, who revealed that she had seduced Washio into the act. Midori makes Yuichi visit the workshop with her, and they learn that everyone involved in the incident is doing better now. Having the weight of his guilt lifted and feeling no more ties to the world, Yuichi attempts suicide by sitting in front of an oncoming train, but stops at the last minute. Him and Midori make a commitment to each other, in a way that is very similar to how Punpun would approach this situation as well, saying that if he ever makes that same mistake again, Midori has the right to kill him. At the badminton tournament, Yaguchi and Komatsu are the finalists and Yaguchi takes a lead. Punpun meets Aiko, who tells him that she only wants to love someone who is completely devoted to her and can take her away. Yaguchi's leg gives out and he concedes defeat to Punpun. However, when Aiko asks Punpun to leave to Kagoshima with her, he refuses. Punpun becomes depressed and reclusive. 2 years later, Midori has become close to the Onodera family and they prepare to move to a new apartment, but Yuichi has been missing for over a week. Volume 3 kicks off with Punpun entering into high school. Midori is running the coffee shop herself now and Yuichi's disappearance takes its toll on her. Yuichi had returned to work at the pottery shop, but after he had had an affair with a student, the woman's ex-husband demanded an exorbitant payment from him. Midori starts to rely on Punpun for comfort and one day at the coffee shop, she rapes Punpun. We also witness here a harrowing moment where Punpun stands on the edge of his family's balcony, only turning back at the last moment, which destroys him and is really fucking hard to read. The effect that Midori's actions here have on Punpun is a real reflection of real life, and I think that's what makes this series so hard to read sometimes, is the fact that it is, in fact, incredibly close to what actually happens in the real world. Seki, needing money, decides to work odd jobs along with Shimizu. A property manager asks Shimizu to help clean out an apartment where a man died, but he backs out. Seki is hired by a woman to murder her ex-boyfriend, but Seki changes his mind when noticing the nice weather. Seki and Shimizu become more determined to stick together. Punpun goes to karaoke with classmates, but doesn't enjoy it at all, leaving with a girl named Kanye, who he asks out on a date. After finding out about the death of his grandfather, Punpun and his mother visit his home in Ofuna, where he learns from Midori that Yuichi had come back home and the two had gotten married. While returning home, Punpun's mother gets irritated at him and tells him to not return home until the following day because she is having a man over. Punpun's mother is having an affair with a married man. She gets a panic attack and while threatening to kill herself, suffers from pneumothorax, becoming hospitalized. She befriends Harumi, whose girlfriend is in the hospital, and the pair discuss their problems, including her difficulty in connecting with her son. On his date with Kanye, Punpun visits an art gallery. Punpun tries hard to get her to like him, but they don't form a connection. As their date comes to an end and Kanye calls him narcissistic, Punpun forcibly tries to kiss her and is slapped away. As she's getting discharged from the hospital, Punpun's mother tries to find Harumi, whom she developed a fondness for, discovering that she just left. Returning home, she finds Punpun still cold towards her and cannot help but lash out at him. On a return appointment, Punpun's mother discovers that she has aggressive cancer. 2 years later, Punpun's mother is on her deathbed and apologizes to Punpun for how she treated him, saying that she loves him. Moving on to Volume 4, Punpun's father visits him and asks him if he would like to live with him, but Punpun declines. After he graduates from high school, he works part-time jobs with his friend Mamura. On the train ride home, he spots Aiko but is unable to find her when doubling back. Punpun moves into an apartment near the station where he saw her, hoping to find her again. After not having success though, Punpun stops going outside and becomes reserved. His landlord, Shishido, who is worried about him, tries to offer him help. He takes him to a bar where Punpun meets Sachi, who he had met in the art gallery on his date with Kanye. Sachi tells Punpun that she wants to illustrate a story he wrote in her guest book. Sachi spots Punpun while he is out searching, and he goes to her house again. There, he opens up to her about his issues as Sachi accuses him of not wanting to actually find Aiko. After she pushes him, Punpun writes her a draft manuscript which she finds unsatisfactory. Sachi confides in Punpun that she used to be unconfident like him too, getting cosmetic surgery, so she has to keep pressuring him to try. Punpun resolves to keep working on the story, and they work towards a final draft by the end of summer. Shishido offers to give Punpun a job once he gets a real estate license. After a misunderstanding, Punpun reveals to Sachi that he loves her. The two have sex and they start getting closer. A year later, Sachi finishes the manga and prepares to show it to a publisher with Punpun. Volume 5 continues where the last one left off. The publisher is unconvinced by Sachi and Punpun's manga, disliking the main character's needless depression, while Shishido gets badly injured after being mistaken for a shoplifter and ends up paralyzed for life. Punpun's childhood friends Seki and Shimizu, who stayed very close, drift apart as Shimizu joins a cult led by the mysterious and exuberant Pegasus. Punpun, having distanced himself from Sachi, who is now continuing the manga on her own, starts using a fake name and acting like a completely different person to shield himself from his depression, but he ends up running into Aiko by chance. Punpun reconnects with Aiko, but lies to her by acting confident and pretending that his life is much better than it actually is. Overwhelmed by his confused feelings, he ends up bringing Aiko to a hotel where he tries to have sex with her, barely stopping when she asks him to. Shocked and angered, she leaves the hotel room, stating that she regrets the two met again. Left in shock and despair by this event, Punpun reunites with Sachi, who has become a more successful manga artist on her own, and announces to him that she is pregnant with her ex-husband's baby. Punpun confesses his lies to Aiko. She confesses in return that she herself had lied about her own life, as she is unsuccessful in her career and still lives with her abusive mother. Instead of accompanying Sachi to the abortion clinic like he promised, Punpun, who is visited by Aiko, has sex with her, and the two decide to leave the city together to start anew. That's where Volume 5 ends off. Moving on to Volume 6, we get into possibly one of the darkest eras of this series. Punpun and Aiko visit Aiko's mother to try to announce to her that Aiko is leaving, but she reacts by stabbing Aiko's side with a knife. Trying to save her, Punpun fights Aiko's mother and ends up strangling her to death, killing her on purpose. The two bury the body in the forest and leave the town to flee from the police, deciding to go to Kagoshima like they had both promised each other when they were children. As they travel, they grow more hostile and resentful toward each other and become more depressed. As Aiko's injury worsens, she tries to puncture Punpun's eye with a fork, but only ends up giving him a minor injury. Meanwhile, Sachi becomes worried about Punpun's absence and starts searching for him. Punpun and Aiko's relationship and injuries worsen more and more as they both display suicidal behavior. After Punpun comes close to killing a stranger for no real reason, the duo arrives in Kagoshima and decide to go to the nearby island Tanegashima. Once there, after an innocent evening spent having fun, Punpun decides to strangle Aiko to death with a rope before killing himself, but she talks him out of it, while also confessing that she is in fact the one who killed her mother, having stabbed her to death after noticing that she was still alive after a fight with Punpun. Meanwhile, Sachi keeps on searching for Punpun by meeting with his friends and family. Volume 6 ends in the darkest stage this series has ever been in. In one volume, Aiko and Punpun have gone from freshly related to runaways, but this was just the beginning, as Volume 7 opens up with Punpun and Aiko continuing their journey, as their individual depression and combined relationships skew downwards. Aiko insists on how happy she is that the two fell in love, but when Punpun wakes up from a nap, refusing to accept the truth, Punpun carries her body with him, but it is eventually discovered and taken away by locals. He comes back to Tokyo and attempts to kill himself near the abandoned miso factory that he visited back in elementary school. Focusing on a storyline I haven't really spoken about yet, Pegasus and his cultists commit mass suicide, but Seki rescues an unconscious Shimizu from the burning building. Although Shimizu survives, he becomes amnesiac and doesn't remember who Seki is. A year later, Punpun, whose probation for the death of Aiko's mother had just finished, has a normal job, having found relative peace in an unexciting normal life. Just a little bit longer, and it'll be Tanabata. Last year was no good, but I hope this year I can see the Milky Way. Aiko, it's been a while. I've got a lot of things to report this year too. My probation is now over, and since last month I started working at the real estate agency that my former boss at Shishido Heights introduced me to. It's a really plain job, but I'm trying my hardest. As for my mangaka friend, the paperback volume 1 of her newest work, the one I helped out on, just came out, so she's pretty happy. And Mimura is getting married next year. Me and all the others are doing well. I'm moving along just fine. It wasn't as difficult as I thought. Avoiding luxury and greed, while working earnestly, to be even the slightest bit of help to others. And when I see those around me smiling, I feel relieved. Since I don't have work tomorrow, maybe I'll go out somewhere. If I did have something I could call a worry, it's the fact that my friend's daughter has grown so attached to me. She thinks of me as her dad. Of course, I do think the child is better off having a father, but I don't think that should be me. I'm fine being by myself. That is the only selfish desire of mine. It's very peaceful, like perhaps the life of a ghost, carefree and without worry. I naturally let the wind take me forwards when it blows. Exactly where I'm headed to is no real concern to me. But eventually, when it is my time to leave, I like to vanish like an insignificant bubble and fade away from everyone's memories as well. There are times when I look back to my childhood of the few months I spent with you, but trying to put such fragmented and vague feelings into words is almost impossible. Rather pathetic, isn't it? Though I don't like having to live with such feelings of shame. It's the lone duty you've charged me with, so I'll keep at it until the very end. Aiko, I've been thinking about whether or not we really saw that Milky Way during that one time in our childhood. Could it be that what we saw was just glorified by our imagination? That's what I wonder these days. These days your voice is a little faint. Aiko, but perhaps your voice was always that way. Is that really how you looked? Even though it's only been a year, I'm growing less confident in what you were really like. Aiko, I already know you can no longer kill me. Aiko, I'm sorry for being a liar. I'm certain I won't be able to see the Milky Way this year or the next, and all future Tanabata nights will be too cloudy. And yet, the world won't end, nor will humanity perish. I have to keep on moving forward. I'm sorry. Aiko. Goodbye. Harumi, an old friend of Punpun from elementary school, meets him by chance in a street, and after a short, incredibly unremarkable discussion, the two part ways. As Punpun, surrounded by the friends he made through those last years, tearfully waves him goodbye, Harumi waves back, knowing that they will likely never meet again. At the school where Harumi teaches, a girl transfers into his class. The ending to Punpun's story is fucking brutal. It gives you the sinking feeling that this can all happen again and their innocence will be tainted, just as it was with Punpun. As Asano himself wanted, the shift from the deranged Onodera to the straight man Harumi helps to ground the series' final breaths from the perspective of a passive onlooker. This man has no inkling to what occurred to the two kids he used to know, and he likely never will. From a narrative perspective, however, the focus on Harumi grounds the series again, with Asano's goal being to make the events of Punpun's life seem as drastic as possible. Changing lanes to a character like Harumi is a perfect way to end on a similar note to how it all started. So with the main story now over, I wanted to dive into what I actually really liked about the story, as well as some other interesting bits that I wanted to talk about. So let's hop into this part of the video. Asano's art is without question tied with Miura's work on Berserk and Sui Yoshida's work on Tokyo Ghoul for me. Every single page is either incredibly interesting, emotive, downright beautiful, creepy or melancholic, and he does this incredibly effortlessly too. Honing in on the main artistic focus of the series for a second, I wanted to briefly look over how Asano used Punpun's forms. They obviously reflect Punpun's emotional state, but looking closer at the way they're presented, the basic bird form represents a childlike innocence and powerlessness in the world. This being shown to us as not only is it the most basic of the forms used, it also reappears after Punpun's undergone many developments. For instance, when Punpun and Sachi have their conversation about romance, or when Aiko storms out of their hotel room, it appears, showing his innocence in this circle of life. Moving on, this form gets some developments, such as the gelled hair it's often seen with. This variation doesn't last for long, but clearly shows Punpun's want to fit in as he graduates into high school. The tetrahedron represents when Punpun was doing the minimum amount of effort to be considered human, merely existing, becoming reclusive in his mannerisms and language. Asano also does the insane thing of using a simple triangle to convey emotion. Depending on the situation, Punpun's flat, unemotive face will turn into a shaded pyramid, losing the face and somehow conveying actual emotion despite its simplicity. Though the next form is a development of the basic bird form, except with Punpun sporting a normal body, leaving his head to take the form of a bird. It's this short period of Punpun's life where things are somewhat normal, and he's starting to feel a part of his humanity, yet he is still Punpun. The way I read it was almost as if he's wearing the clothes of a normal person, but he's still the same kid underneath, which is actually true contextually as well, as at this point, he's adapted a personality around Fujikawa Takashi, acting as a barrier to allow himself to experience some form of confidence. Though, this doesn't last long, as once Aiko comes back into his life, he changes into a darker presence. I find this Daruma form incredibly interesting, as it's almost as if his life has gotten a hold of him in such a way that there's no longer a disconnect between what he feels and how he is. He now just is. Which is what I honestly thought when reading this form's introduction. Is that really what my face always looked like? Punpun is now seeing himself for how his mental state perceives himself. Dark, and in most senses an outcast from humanity. Finally though, once Punpun goes off the deep end and his inner rage is let out, he takes on this dark form with black bullhorns, which is often shown with a beak and, once he gets his eye injury, a white square. This form obviously shows all of Punpun's malice and negative emotions coming to the forefront, as his journey with Aiko sees him diving further and further into these demons. In terms of how this is drawn though, we often see it with dark brushstrokes again, symbolising anger, yet we also see it with a huge hole in its head, potentially symbolising loneliness or a lack of fulfillment in what the two are actually doing. Beyond Punpun, on the topic of art, I wanted to bring up God and the way this character is presented within the pages. Having a lifelike face in any manga is off-putting enough, yet here it's amplified even further. God is Punpun's safety net, the chant his uncle taught him as a kid to summon him, allowing these visions of God to appear. What's more, the picture used for God is not findable and is not of any notorious figure. Instead, it's one of Asano's friends, heavily edited and redrawn. So technically, this face doesn't exist, which really adds to the uneasy feel it presents. Beyond just God though, the backgrounds in Punpun are always breathtaking. Asano uses real-world imagery, filtering it through with screen tones and the like in order for it to fit in a manga. As I'm showing on screen now, especially when there's a member of the Punpun family on the page, these backgrounds help us hone in on them due to the contrast. They are also genuinely beautiful to look at, and there are a large number of these double spreads that I would happily have hanging up on my wall. I feel like I have spoken quite a bit about Punpun in this video so far, so now I'm going to hand the mic to the other characters and talk about them a bit. Aiko herself is one of the most tragic characters I have ever read. From her introduction as a naive little girl who has fundamental and idealistic aspirations, to a dwindling memory in the head of her abuser, her upbringing clearly messed her up, with her mother being abusive and cultist, which fed into her school life. This leading to her constant desire to run away to Kagoshima, fixating on this idea with Punpun, who could never bring himself to actually carry out her wishes. For someone like Aiko, this obviously causes more mental turmoil than the average person. A scene with her that breaks my heart is when her and Punpun decide to meet after school. Punpun's mother is rushed to the hospital, and because of his circumstances at home, he misses their date, whereas for Aiko, this was likely only an excuse to escape her circumstances at home and spend some time with someone that really cares about her. When Punpun drives past her and we see tears rolling down her face, my heart just shatters. It's so pure and heartbreaking, you just want to reach through the screen and give her a hug. Though, as we know, this never happens, and even if the series nears its end and we still wish an outside force will save Aiko from Punpun, it never does, and it never will. Her story ending in complete tragedy. Yuichi as a character is incredibly morally grey. Now, it's incredibly challenging to look at the backstory and flashback of his character and still find him all around likeable. It's one of the few problems I do have with the series. Characters such as Yuichi and Midori end up being tied up in illegal sexual encounters. Yes, Japanese laws are different to ours, but if you're having to bring up that point in any context, you need to sit back and wonder what you're actually arguing for. Preface aside, I love Yuichi's character, a tormented man that we see through the eyes of the young Punpun. His life is plagued by guilt and bad decisions, so much so that he almost commits suicide after the feeling of guilt is finally lifted from him due to how much of a burden this actually played on his life. It's also through him that the Dear God, Tinkle Tinkle Hoy chant is passed down to Punpun, arguably resulting in a lot of the poor decisions that Punpun makes, with this being in line with its origin in fact, as the chant was originally told to Yuichi by the girl he almost slept with, the girl that ruined his mental state for years to come. A scene with Yuichi that I absolutely adore is our final scene with him. His child is born, and his final words are, "Damn it." So this is hope, isn't it? It shows him breaking down with tears rolling down his face, finally seeing some sense of happiness, following on from the struggles that his family and him have gone through. Pegasus is one of the more controversial parts of the series, appearing throughout and often jerking the narrative to a halt, ultimately culminating in a seemingly lackluster payoff where the entire Pegasus ensemble burn to death in a fire. I think that the artwork and creativity that Asano uses around the Pegasus portions is actually some of the best and most imaginative in the entire story, though that doesn't make his character any more interesting the first time around. One of the main issues with him as a character is that he is far detached from the main narrative, only really leaning into the side story of Seki and Shimizu, which is already detached from Punpun's story. Another shortcoming of Pegasus' story is that there isn't a necessarily tangible narrative to follow. It's largely spoken in good vibrationisms, and always at pivotal parts of Punpun's story. I know that it's meant to almost act as a foreseer of events that are unfolding in Punpun's life, but it often misses the mark in my opinion. Asano himself describes the Pegasus plotline as being a take on a shonen story, with the cultists genuinely working together to stop the force of the evil Dark Spot. It's even implied that the meteor shower at the end only avoided hitting Earth due to their efforts, which, when keeping this in mind, actually makes this scene really fucking cool. The Daruma doll that was gradually approaching the Earth ends up losing to Pegasus in a game of pop-up pirate, leading to the ensemble's victory. On a rereading of the series, this knowledge does actually give the Pegasus chapters a lot more enjoyability and texture. Despite the shortcomings of Pegasus' storyline, The story of Shimizu and Seki is actually really interesting to follow. Two of Punpun's school friends who are always so close yet so far away. There are multiple scenes where they are on the same street as each other and don't interact or see each other, despite the fact that they definitely remember each other, just as is proven at the end of the series with Harumi. In a vacuum, it's a really interesting take on how different people's lives can be leaving school. They go through their own developments, of course, with both having their down moments, such as Seki's outburst at Shimizu upon his delusions surrounding his dead mum, which is a plotline I didn't cover in the recap to save time, but it's, again, a tragic one, with Seki saving Shimizu's life in childhood at the expense of his mother's after a car went careening into her. Shimizu's story is largely tied to Pegasus, with him finding a new home in the cult, forming a disconnect between the two friends, ultimately resulting in us realizing that whilst it seemed Shimizu needed Seki, it was almost the other way around, with Seki almost taking a guardian role over Shimizu. This comes to a head at the end of the story where Shimizu is amnesiac from the fire and can't recall their relationship, though it's implied that they remain friends afterwards, with Shimizu becoming a nurse. So a somewhat happy ending for these guys. This has been Punpun, and my longest video to date. Thank you so much for getting this far. Please do check on those around you and always remember that there are people around to help you if you're struggling. This series should not be taken as an example. None of the characters are role models, but they are human. Humans do make mistakes, and one of the joys of life is that we can keep going despite these shortcomings. I want everyone watching to remember that. But again, thank you so much for watching, and good night.